Hey, yes, I know, I would also rather be in an actual theater right now. But virtual theater is a lot like regular theater. It's just worse. And if you were in a real theater right now, then you would read my bio and it would say, Aviva Pressman, she has been in plays. And that's cool, but then you would go home and you would wonder, what does that girl's shower look like? And you would never know the answer to that question unless you were really sexy and I brought you home with me. But today, sexy or not sexy, you get to not only see my shower, but learn about my entire bathroom. For instance, this is the first shower that I ever showered in. And that bathtub over there, I had like such fun splashy playtimes when I was a toddler. And I would come over here and wrap myself in a big towel and stand in front of this built-in heater, thank you very much. And I'd be so warm and cozy that even if I had to pee, I wouldn't move from the heater, I would just pee right here on the rug until I got caught one day and I stopped. Side note, my husband says that I tell too many stories about times that I've had to pee places that I shouldn't. And so I'm gonna try not to do that anymore in this show, but haha, no promises. My parents bought this house when I was 2 weeks old. This is back when you could buy a house on 2 teacher salaries. And my grandparents also helped them to buy the house. My grandparents like this one because it's right near their synagogue. And when I say their synagogue, I don't mean like, the synagogue they went to. I mean their friggin' synagogue. When you walk into the sanctuary, the Aron HaKodesh is there. And if you don't know what that is, it's like the Torah pantry where you keep the Torahs. And it was this beautiful gold and burgundy thing. My grandfather designed it. And then when you walked outside from there and you go around the corner, then there's a sign that says the Rabbi Jacob Pressman Academy of Temple Beth Am. And my grandfather was Rabbi Jacob Pressman. They didn't name the school after him because he gave a lot of money. They named the school after him because he was awesome. In small ways and big ways. For instance, after he designed the Aron HaKodesh, he hired an African-American architect to design the rest of the building, which was a bigger deal than it should have been in 1959. In addition, he helped start almost every major progressive Jewish institution on the West Coast. He helped start the Maple Counseling Center, which did sliding scale therapy, or they still do, actually. And he started it at a time when nobody really wanted to talk about mental health services. He was such a big deal that he gave the benediction at the 1984 Democratic National Convention. And not only that, but he marched with Martin Luther King. He was pretty cool. Now, my grandmother, Marjorie, she was awesome in her own right. Not only did she raise millions and millions of dollars for all of these different charitable organizations, but she also wore pants to synagogue on high holidays as the rabbi's wife. That was such a big deal that there was an article about it in the newspaper. And in that article, she was quoted as saying, "I didn't have a role model, so I had to be my own role model," which is maybe the most badass thing I've ever heard. I really looked up to them. But something happened to them as they got older. And it's something that happens to a lot of people as they get older, which is that they also got weirder. And I'm not saying that with any judgment. I recognize that I am only 34 and I'm already telling strangers on the internet about places that I've peed, so I have no room to judge. But, you know, it is what happened. So, the first thing that happened was that they got a weird, what's the word I'm looking for? Relationship with mortality. And what I mean by that is that they were impossible to kill. I wasn't trying, but they just kept getting in these awful accidents and then they would be completely fine. And that's gotta do something to your brain. So like one time my grandfather fell down an escalator from the top to the bottom and people fell on top of him and then they gathered around thinking, this 80-something-year-old man has gotta be dead, right? Nope, he just stood right up, said, "Escalators move too fast, don't you know it?" and went to the movies. My grandmother, she fell down, split her head open from here to here. She didn't even have a scar. She healed like a baby. So there was that, and then there was the fact that they were mostly made of metal because of all of their surgeries that led me to call them my robot grandparents. And I told them this too. I was close with them, so I told them that I called them the robot grandparents and all of my various reasons why. And my grandmother said, "That's funny." And my grandfather said, "Oh, I don't know, I'm ready to die," which is legit. The other weird thing that I'd like to highlight today, because there were many, was that my grandpa started doing these one-person shows. And yes, I recognize that I'm a hypocrite for calling that weird, but bear with me. There's a lot of really interesting details to this one. First off, he called them one-man shows, but we were all required to perform. They were all emceed by Monty Hall. And if you're not familiar with Monty Hall because you are under the age of 1,000, he's the former host of the game show Let's Make a Deal. And on that show, he would come out and he would say, "Do you want the prize that's behind this curtain or in this fancy box over here?" Or, whatever. And then you maybe win something. But in my house, he may as well have been Meryl Streep. He was such a huge celebrity, and he was emceeing these events, and wasn't it exciting for all of us? To give a flavor of what these shows were like, I'm going to tell you the titles. First, we had Live at 85. Okay, that makes sense. Then we had 88 at 88. And the invitation for that had a picture of my grandpa looking all cheeky, staring at you, sitting at the 88 piano keys. And then my favorite was 410 and Rabbi Jack's at it again. That one you would think would be for his 90th birthday, because that is what 410 means in the English language. But you would be incorrect, because he was so sure that he wasn't going to live till 90, but he liked that title so much that he just did it at his 89th. And then he did turn 90, so he just did another one. And also, these were not small family gatherings, if that was what you were picturing in your head. At one of them, they raised $250,000 for charity. At just one. And I don't know why. It's inexplicable to me that somebody would want to go see a 90-year-old man singing parodies he wrote to the MAME soundtrack, but there we were. And a lot of these happened in that same synagogue. It was where a lot of our life events took place. My parents got married there, nursery school graduation, my bat mitzvah, my brother's bar mitzvah, anniversaries, all kinds of things. It was also where I sang my very first solo. Now, this was kind of a big deal for a few reasons. One, my entire family was going to be in town. I don't even remember why, but the first 2 rows were filled with the robot grandparents, my parents, my older brother Elijah, my cousins from up north, and my aunt and uncle, and then my other aunt who lives in Israel. They were all there. In addition, my music teacher at Pressman Academy at the time couldn't strictly be said to be like a musician or like a teacher, so much as she was like an Israeli who owned an accordion. So she would hold me after class a lot and ask my opinion about things, because my dad was a musician and a choral conductor and a choral teacher. So I knew more than she did at that age. And she would ask my advice. So I really felt like it was my knowledge that helped to make this concert go on. So we come out on stage the night of, and I'm really excited, and I have the very first solo in the concert. And the place is not like 88 at 88 packed, but it's pretty full. So I walk out to the microphone, and I nod to my accompanist, and she begins playing her accordion, and I start singing. Lech ilach, to a land that I will show you. And it is immediately clear that the microphone is off. Most people in the audience are just kind of like, "Oh, okay, I'm sure that's somebody's job. Somebody will take care of that." I look over at my teacher and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "I don't know." And I'm like, "Yeah, why would I ask you, right?" But the Pressman family is like, everything is our business. And they spring into action. So first my dad jumps up out of his chair and he bounds up the side stairs to the backstage area. Then my grandpa gets up and he kind of army crawls towards my feet to see if the microphone is plugged in. So that's really fun. I look over at my teacher and I'm like, what do I do? And she's like, oh, well, just sing it again, because I think she thinks that they're gonna finish it. So then we start hearing this like bang, 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 clang from backstage where my dad is, I guess, vandalizing the place. And I'm like, let me look to a little. My grandpa's at my feet. And at this point, it becomes clear to the entire audience that he cannot get down. He is an old man and he's stuck like a turtle. So obviously what we need is more Pressmans. So my mom and my aunt stand up and they start pulling on his legs. But my grandpa's like, there's a concert going on, do you mind? So he's fighting them. So he just lays there and they just go sit back down. So I keep singing it and I get to the end of my solo and I'm like, da, 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 because the microphone comes on my last note. I found out later that is because my dad did legitimately vandalize something backstage and it needed to be replaced, but he got the job done, I guess. So the song ends and we're gonna go on with the concert, but then we realize, haha, Rabbi Jacob Pressman is still stuck on stage. So my mom and my aunt get back up out of their seats, pull on his legs, bring him back down, and no one can make fun of him because he's 1,000 and he's the rabbi, so everybody's like, ah, yes, good job. Good rabbiing, sir. And we go on. So we get to the end of the concert. And I am livid. Not at my grandpa, because as we established, he's 1,000 and, you know, old and weird. But at my dad, because he was young enough that he should have known better. So I go up to him, I'm so mad, and he has no idea why I am so mad. Like, no concept whatsoever. And I'm like, Dad, you had to have known that you weren't going to be able to finish that by the time I finished my solo. Like, you didn't even do it. And he said, Aviva, there were a lot of other kids who had solos, and their parents were sitting way farther back. And because of what we did, yeah, you were a little embarrassed. But everybody had a better concert. And I was like, God, Dad, you don't get it! But now looking back on it, I realize it's really emblematic of everything in my family. This idea that even if it doesn't seem like your problem, if you have tools, you should step in and you should try and solve it. They did that with social justice. They did that with things through their entire lives, even when it made them huge pains in the ass. It's what made the Pressman family the Pressman family. And also how Temple Beth Am came to be. Dora!
Listen to, gonna mess me up some of these days. Some of these days. Gonna miss me, honey. That's pretty hard for me.
Yeah.
That's not bad for 95
In 8 months.
and 8 months.
That's my heart, girl, you're gonna kiss me too. Gonna miss me, honey, some of these days. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Me, honey, some of these days.
Yay!
The entertainment is free.
Oh, thank you.
My dad read this parenting book that said that if you want your kids to be calm and behave themselves, then you should paint their rooms calm pastel colors. So he went out and he special ordered these bold, vibrant rainbow blinds for my bedroom and for my brother's bedroom because he wanted us to be interesting and question authority and think creatively. And I guess it worked because I'm working in the arts, my brother's a ballet dancer. I'm not entirely sure it was just the blinds. We did a lot of creative things when I was growing up. I went to my grandparents' house at like age 9 or 10 and I started learning how to do calligraphy from my grandpa in English and Hebrew. Or my dad would teach my brother all these old vaudeville jokes and then he would film us like awkwardly repeating them to each other on our front lawn. But my favorite was that my dad would come home with a new musical theater score. and he would put it on the piano, and we would just sight read through it, with him playing and me singing, and tell the story together. When he died, I inherited his collection of musical theater scores, as well as this beautiful house. And even when he was dying, creativity and the arts were a part of the process. We went with a family friend to one of those pottery painting places, and we picked out the biggest cookie jar that we could find, and we painted it together to be his urn. The women at Color Me Mine were very surprised by our activity. And now I take the cookie jar and I dress it up for Halloween every year because my dad loved Halloween and he took it very seriously. So I dress him up in a silly costume and then I leave him like that all year until the next Halloween. Because why not? I've slept in this room over half my life now. And I had 2 lullabies that my parents would sing to me before I went to sleep. One of them went, "Go to sleep, little creep, or the boogeyman will eat you." In case you were wondering if my dad would have appreciated the dark humor of the urn costumes, I feel like that should put your mind at ease. And then the other lullaby was this. He's a deadlift.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Elijah and Aviva Pressman show. And here they are.
Did you take a bath last night? Well, I was the one missing. Do you have any talcum powder? Yes. Walk this way. If I could walk that way, I wouldn't need the talcum powder. My dog has no nose. How would he smell? Terrible. Terrible.
He died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. It's a really lovely thing to read in an obituary. But peacefully? My dad died of a cancer that kills you by sucking away all your nutrients so you slowly starve to death. It's incredibly painful. There's vomiting, there's hallucinations and paranoia. He wasted away to the point where even when he went to sleep, his eyes wouldn't fully close because the fat pads on his eyelids were so depleted. Peacefully. Whee! Caretaking. It's all the things you think of, cooking and cleaning. And then there's the sick people extras like dealing with nurses and social workers, schedules, medications, all of that. But then my dad was also a high school music teacher for 40 years. So he had 48 years worth of students who all wanted updates from me. And then some of them also wanted to talk to me about how he was like a father to them, and they had all of these feelings about this. And on one hand, that was beautiful, but on the other hand, don't you have someone else to talk to? I'm maybe more like his daughter, and I'm busy right now. But the worst part, or the hardest part about caretaking, is the emotional turbulence. Sometimes my dad would be so funny when he hallucinated. Like, he would go, "Ba-dum-bump. It's a joke." And it totally was. Comedy gold, right? We laughed. But then other times he would get really anxious and he would decide he needed to do a bunch of things around the house that were jobs that didn't really exist. And he would get up and need to do them, and then I'd get him back to bed and he'd forget he had just been up and need to get back up again. He was just strong enough to get himself out of bed, but not strong or lucid enough to keep himself safe. So I had to follow him around every step to make sure he didn't fall or try and eat the lamp or whatever he was doing that day. So one time this went on for a day and a half, which meant that I had been awake following him around for 36 hours. And again, he said, "I want to sit up, I want to get up." And I went, "Dad, no, you don't need to do that right now." But he was lucid. And his eyes got wide and he looked at me and he said, "Are you mad at me? I don't think I can die with you mad at me. What did I do?" And that moment still breaks my heart. Which brings me to, I know I'm writing backwards and that's going to be really scary for some of the Gentiles, but I promise I won't leave you behind. I will walk you through every step of the way. This is the Hebrew phrase for humanity. Because watching somebody lose their humanity, I think, is the hardest part. When I first moved home to take care of him, my dad said to me, if things get really bad and if I start to lose my humanity and my dignity and I'm in a lot of pain, would you put a pillow over my face and kill me? And while I absolutely agreed with his right to die how he wanted to, I also knew that realistically it's not something that I could do. And then when he was on his deathbed, I said to him one day, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you?" And he said, "Yes, but you won't do it." And really, I don't know whether or not I did it. I don't know whether or not I prolonged his life or cut it shorter or made it better or worse sometimes, because he would get these cravings, these food cravings, and I didn't know which were real and which were hallucinations. Like one time he said he wanted a hot dog, and I said, okay, I can get you a hot dog. And he said, no, I got one right here. And pretended to chomp his finger. And I was like, oh, was that good? And he's like, nah. It's like, okay, do you want me to get you something else? And he said, oh, no, I'm full. Oh, okay. So was that whole thing a hallucination? I don't know. And at what point was I not giving him food when he should have been? And at what point was I doing what the doctors tell you, which is to not feed a dying person if they're not hungry, because you can end up like kind of prolonging them and their body's trying to shut down, and then you don't let their body shut down, that kind of thing. And I don't know. And it's thoughts like that that provide the need for self-care. Which there really is a need for it, but that doesn't mean that it's even possible to do sometimes, or at least it felt impossible to me. Because when I did ask other people to help, first of all, I had to teach them how to do it, which was sometimes as much work as doing it myself. Second of all, my dad had to trust them, which just like a toddler, sometimes they just want their mom. Since I was there the whole time, I became that person. But also, even when you had somebody good that he trusted, it didn't always go right. Somebody came to help that my dad and I both very much trusted, and I took the night away. And my dad decided that because mom was away, he was gonna do something he knew he wasn't supposed to do, which is go outside by himself. So he went outside to get the paper, and when he reached down to pick it up, he fell, and he couldn't get back up. So he had to drag himself up to the front door. And that wouldn't have happened if I was home. Because A, my dad wouldn't have tried to pull that with me. And B, I know every creak of this house. I know my dad's routines. I know when he's being sneaky. So I would have caught it, but how could I possibly ask anyone else to have those years of knowledge? It's impossible. Then another time I did so much work to prep for being gone. I scheduled every meeting, every nurse, every piece of medication that had to be picked up. I did everything ahead of time so that the time I was going to be gone would just be watching him and making sure he didn't die. And he wasn't hallucinating during that point either, so it was a really easy job. And I came home, and the person I had made it so easy for looked at me and said, yeah, it really wasn't that hard. And not that she was wrong, but the tone suggested that I guess I had been complaining too much about what I was going through. I don't know. Which brings me to responsibility. Whose responsibility is it to take care of a dying person? I mean, I don't think there's any real rules on it, but I know that this one became mine. When my dad was first sick, but they didn't know what was wrong with him, my brother was living with him. My brother lived with him all for his 20s. And my dad would call and say like, oh yeah, I'm not feeling so good, I'm getting some tests, but I didn't think it was anything serious, and I figured if it was something serious, my brother would tell me. Well, he didn't. And finally, I got a phone call from one of my dad's students saying, your father is dying and your brother is not stepping up to the plate to help him. You need to come home. And so I did. I came home right away. I got my godmother, who's good at hospitals, and she helped so that we got him good care. And he had tumors taken out of his intestines, and they said he was home free. And then 6 months later, when the cancer came back, I knew that I had to come home because of what had happened the first time, because my brother hadn't taken responsibility. I had hoped that we would do it together. Instead, he moved out. And that's all okay. I wish that he had taken responsibility for not taking responsibility. He sometimes tells people that we took shifts taking care of my dad, which is true, but sometimes my shift was 3 months, while his shift was a day. Mishpacha, or mishpocha, if you're feeling, sassy or Yiddish, which is, my default state, so I guess I am. The family came in the last couple weeks. The nurse said that my dad had 2 to 7 days left, but of course, because he was stubborn, he ended up lasting 2 weeks. And my uncle from up north and my aunt from Israel had been coming around as much as they could. My aunt came to the country to help, which was amazing. But they couldn't be there every day, and obviously the other issues with having other people caretake, it was just hard. But in the last couple weeks, they came around, and so did my brother. And that is when we started taking shifts, which I was very appreciative of for a number of reasons. First of all, man, I was tired. Second of all, my grandparents hadn't come to say goodbye to my dad yet. And it wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they didn't believe he was gonna die. I was telling them that this was happening, but I was, 25, 26 years old, so I was a baby to them. And their basic idea of the matter was, you just need to get Jewier doctors. Which sounds ridiculous, but considering how they had been avoiding death for so long, I understand that their feelings about mortality were just a little different. So I get it. But then once my uncle, who is also a rabbi, came to town, and my aunt was there, and we had these grown-ups telling them, no, he's gonna die, you've gotta come by, then they decided it was time. So we were obviously nervous about this meeting because we didn't know how lucid my dad was gonna be. Maybe he was gonna say something totally bonkers to them. But we sat him up in a chair so he could kind of, hold court and feel less like a dying person. And he was surprisingly lucid. We had this beautiful conversation where he told them that he loved them and that they had been good parents, that he hoped that they would remember him as being at peace, ready to die and having had a good life. He told them that he wished that they had been more physically affectionate with him, so that he would have known how to be more physically affectionate with his own kids, which was kind of hard to hear, but I was glad that I heard it. And for a while, there was just silence. We just kind of looked at each other a lot, no one really knowing what to say. But at the end of my dad's beautiful speech, my grandma was just nodding her head along. He looked at my grandpa, and he reached his hand out so that his fingertips were almost touching my grandfather's cheek, and he said, "Are those onion rings in the shape of your face?" And I was like, okay, here we go, it's hallucination time. And my grandmother was like, what's happening? She was not having it. And my grandfather kind of came into the room for the first time. You know how sometimes people who are really up there in age, they're not quite with you, they don't seem present, and then all of a sudden they are? So that happened, and we were like, okay, here he is, the rabbi. He's awake, he's about to share his wisdom with us. What's up, Rabbi Jack? And he looks at us, and he goes, "Some enchanted evening." Do you ever just get a song in your head and you don't know why? "You may meet a stranger." And my grandma's like, "Jack, now is not the time." And he's like, "It's a great song. You may meet a stranger." And I'm like, "Dad, why don't we get you back to bed?" And he's like, "But I just want to eat Dad's face." And I'm like, "You are my father, and I love you, and I want to give you everything in the world because you are dying, but also I can't let you eat my grandfather's face." So I get him back to bed, and my grandfather, I guess, probably eventually stopped singing, and they left. And that was the last time that they all saw each other. And my dad lived about a week after that. It was a pretty calm week. He slept a lot more. There were still some hallucinations. One time he was conducting the Madrigal Singers, his high school choir, and it was clear they were like in a hotel about to do a competition. And he told them that they sounded so beautiful. And then he said, "I really hope this isn't a hallucination." And then another time he woke up and he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "The afterlife is a trick, don't ever die," which was really reassuring. And then one day, it was actually the first time that he and I were alone together since the family showed up. And I like to think that he picked that moment on purpose, but I don't really know. He told me he wanted to get up. And his bed was right over here, where this computer is now. And I got him up. He walked a few steps and then he sat down right in front of me. He didn't make it very far. And then he fell on my shoulder. And I thought he was about to die, but I wasn't sure because there were so many times that I thought that. And we sat there for, I don't know how long, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, with his head on my shoulder. And I told him that I loved him and that he didn't have to stay alive for me. I would miss him, but I would be okay. And then I felt him get lighter. And I thought, oh, maybe he's waking up. And I sat him up just as the rest of the family was coming into the room. And he took his final breath. And he was slow, kind of like, and then his mouth filled with fluid and he died. And in that moment, I remember thinking, gross, this fluid is on my shirt. And then immediately thinking, feeling so guilty that I thought that, because all I should be thinking about is the fact that the person that I love most in the world is gone. But both things were true. He was gone, and there was dying person goo on my shirt. And now I sleep every night in this bed right next to where he died. But that's neither here nor there. We had a funeral a couple days later. It was small. I did a memorial a few months later for all of his students and everything, but this was just friends and close family. And Monty Hall was there, of course. We're sitting there, and I'm next to my boyfriend at the time, my now husband. And there's the coffin's right in front of us, and then it's flanked by 2 curtains. And the rabbi's standing right in front. And she's crying because she knew my dad too, and we're all crying. And she says, "Can everyone please take their seats?" And we see everyone taking their seats. Monty Hall goes and he sits over there. And my boyfriend leans over to me and he says, "Tell Monty Hall I want what's behind the curtain, not what's in the box." Which was honestly the best crafted funeral joke you've ever heard in your life. And my dad would have loved it so much. And all I wanted to do was call him and tell it to him.
Because how often do you have the opportunity to say in retrospect, this is what I've discovered. It's like reading your obituary by mistake in the newspaper and saying, you know what? Life is good. Life is amazing. People are amazing. You are amazing. And being able to be part of you is a blessing. To hear that in the middle of everything, in the middle of saying atonement for whatever you have supposedly done, to stop and take time for Joel Pressman, whoever the hell he is. Excuse me, I said hell.
Twice.
Shit, I wasn't supposed to. I can do it. I've been teaching for 38 years. I've had to watch my language. Who cares then? They're gonna fire me?
I have a ton of memories in this house. obviously. My mom used to come home, and the first sound that she would make would be, that's how I knew she was here. Now, it's very clear to me as an adult that that was aimed at my dad. But as a kid, I thought she just didn't want to come home to any of us. So then it was Thanksgiving, and my dad said, who wants to say something that they're thankful for? And my mom said, again, definitely aimed at my dad. But as a kid, I thought, nothing you're thankful for? You can't think of anyone or anything at all? This is the den. This is where my mom told me that my dad never wanted me, and that he also never wanted her, so she had to trick him into conceiving me. But she would tell me the story about that when I was older because it wasn't really appropriate. It is unclear to me which part of that entire conversation was appropriate. So then I think she saw me palling around with my dad and realized that what she had told me hadn't ruined my relationship with him, and she got scared. So she knocked on the door of this bathroom and she said, "Don't tell your dad what we talked about, because if you do, then he might think you're on my side and take away your college money. And then you won't be able to go to college." Okay. Okay, now pause, because I don't have any bad memories in this hallway, but I do have some really adorable pictures of me and my dad. Got this little shrine, and then this is a piece of art that one of his students made him, I think, and this is just stuff. And then Joel Pressman changed my life, so dramatic. And then some calligraphy that my grandfather made for my grandmother. And back to it. I was in my bedroom. I was homesick from school, and my mom didn't know that I was home yet because my dad took us to school while my mom slept in. And so I was laying in bed, and my mom got into the shower. Thinking she was home alone, she started screaming. And I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember that she was in this shower where we started off our day, and she was screaming at the soap. I remember her saying, "You're filthy, you're disgusting." And it was really scary for me, you know? But the scariest part was that when she realized I was home, she came in and I said, are you okay? And she said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I wish she had just been honest with me. Like, if she had just said, things are really hard for me right now, and I'm not doing well, and that's the way that I release my tension or my anger, then I would have understood. But instead, she pretended everything was fine, and that was so scary to me as a kid, you know? So later on, I told her that that was the scary part, and what she said to me was, "Well, I tried to tell you that. I tried to talk to you about it, but you wouldn't let me." And that is not how I remember it. But I was just a kid, and she was a grown-up, and so I don't know. Plus the fact that my mom has always told me that I don't have a great grasp of reality, so maybe I don't, and maybe my version of events is incorrect. But then also I have things from when I'm older that I remember. Things where I wasn't young enough, and I think I remember them right. Like, I remember my mom telling us that she was gonna divorce my dad the night before my 18th birthday. And I remember walking through the halls at high school, and I was crying, and my best friend was following me around and saying, "Don't wish her a happy birthday," because every time someone did, I burst into tears. And that started happening again ever since my dad died too. But anyway, that's how I remember it. But when I talked to my mom about it, she said, "No, I waited till the day after your birthday. I wouldn't have done that to you." So maybe I'm remembering it wrong. I was in this room, my parents' bedroom, when my dad told me the story of my conception as he had heard it. He was crying when he told it to me because he was sure that it was the reason that my brother wasn't showing up. That my brother had heard this story and thought it was true and that my dad was a monster. So the story goes like this. My dad went to a strip club. That's believable. My dad definitely went to strip clubs. And my mom followed him there. And she disguised herself as a stripper. I don't know what that means. And she pretended to work there, and she had her way with him. She got him drunk and had sex with him. The most forward I have ever been with my mother was about that story. And it was when I said to her, Mom, that story doesn't make you look good, because either you're lying, you're a liar, or you're telling the truth and you're a rapist. And she said, I'm not a rapist. Okay. And then later she came back. She came back to me a couple weeks later about it, and what she said to me was, oh, well, actually, I never told anyone that story. Your godmother made up that story because she was so disappointed in her own kids and she wanted to steal you away from me. And I said, okay, well then what is the story of my conception that you were gonna tell me when I was a teenager? And she said, well, I can't tell you that because then I'll be saying bad things about your father and you'll be mad at me. So I'm really stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I mean, I guess she's right, because I really didn't want her saying bad things about my dad. And that's kind of where this comes in. You know, this story I'm telling today isn't about my broken relationship with my mom, but I can't tell the story of losing my dad without showing this side of it. Every time I tried to talk to my mom during this entire thing, during caretaking for my dad, she couldn't show me any bit of empathy, and she had to say bad things about him. Like, she just couldn't help herself. And I always thought, like, I really genuinely thought that if there was something that was really wrong, that my mom would try and be there for me emotionally. And maybe she tried, but I never felt any empathy from her through the entire process. The only thing she wanted to talk about was my brother and how actually he was doing as much as I was. And if he wasn't, that's because I pushed him away with my controlling nature, or because my dad was so awful to him, or any number of reasons. And I just don't get that. I don't get why my brother can't just have some faults and I can't have some successes, but I'm just not allowed. So when my dad died, I didn't have another parent to fall back on. I had a family where I could be hated, feel like I was hated at least, feel angry and scared and anxious all the time, or I would have no family at all.
You do the wheels on the bus? How does that one go?
The wheels on the bus go round and around, around and around. The wheels on the bus go round and around, all through the town. The babies on the bus go wah, 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 wah. The babies on the bus.
That's what the babies do?
Yeah.
What do the mommies do?
Kiss, kiss.
When the daddies?
The daddies on the bus go hug, hug, hug. Hug, hug, hug. The daddies on the bus go hug, hug, hug. The daddies on the bus go hug, hug, hug.
Let the record show that Daddy is getting a hug right now. Thank you, Aviva.
And the mommies on the bus go kiss, kiss, kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Kiss, kiss, kiss.
Thank you. And I got a kiss, too. Thank you.
The boys on the bus go ho. The girls on the bus go hee 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 hee. The girls on the bus go hee 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 all through the day. The boys on the bus go yo ho ho.
Do the girls on the bus ever go yo ho ho? Don't they like going yo ho ho? Do you like going yo ho ho? Yes, I thought so.
I have to sleep on this bed tonight. It's filthy. I love that video because I'm very cute. And also because you could see my dad teaching me about gender roles and the boxes you get put in, and I'm so passionate about that. And you could see that I got it from him. My grandma wasn't always as good at those like boxes things. One time I was watching the news with her, and she said to me, I really don't want to be racist, but whenever I watch the news, I always see a black person committing a crime. And I said a few things, but one of them was, okay, Grandma, but 99% of violent crime is committed by men, and you still like men. And she said, thank you, that's very helpful. From my grandmother, I learned that if someone tells you that you are problematic, it is a gift. One time I was out to dinner with my grandfather, and he started to cry, and I didn't know why, and he said, growing up as the only Jew on Christian Street in the Great Depression, I never thought that I would ever taste anything this good. From my grandpa, I learned to be grateful for the little things. Oh, there's one on the floor, hold on. So, at Pressman Academy, we didn't celebrate Halloween because some Jewish families don't celebrate, so they were erring on the side of caution even though we all celebrated Halloween. So my dad came to pick me up, and he was in his Halloween costume. And they were like, you can't go in there like that. And he was like, I'm gonna pick up my kid. So he blew past them, and he flung open the door to the daycare, and all the kids, we were all just like, oh, scandalous. And my dad was the wolf man, and the light is streaming in, and I was like, that's my dad. And I walked out. From my dad, I learned it's okay to be a rebel. When my grandpa was a young rabbi, this guy came into the synagogue with a gun, and he said, give me $5,000. And my grandpa was like, I don't have $5,000, but I've got $400. I'll take you to the bank and we'll get you the money. So he did. And he listened to all his problems the whole way. He was really nice to him. And so then the guy trusted him and called back a few weeks later and said, I need more money. Can you wire me some money? And my grandfather did. And because he was so kind, this guy actually tried to pay back the money. He paid back several installments. From my grandfather, I learned that even if someone is unkind to you, you can still be kind to them. My mother. So my mom obviously didn't always understand me or anything, but she would do this awesome thing where she would take a big present and she would wrap it in tinfoil. And then she would cover it in all of these pieces of candy, taped to them individually. And then that way, when you were unwrapping, you could eat the candy and you could eat it through the whole week. From my mom, I learned the gift of making an effort for someone. When my grandpa was getting older and the dementia was really kind of taking hold, he never did that thing that you sometimes see of like, who are you? I don't know you, stay away. He would just go, I'm sorry, are we related? We are, isn't that lovely? Did you hear that? She's my granddaughter. From my grandpa, I learned that it is better to be nice than to be right. From my grandmother, I learned almost the opposite lesson. I was doing these fundraisers, but I felt really awkward asking people for money. And my grandmother told me it's for charity. It's okay to be a little rude. And from my grandmother, I learned that it's better to do good in the world than to be polite. My dad, if he said we were gonna leave at 7 a.m., then at 6:58, he was standing by the door, tapping his toe, yelling, "You have 2 minutes." From my dad, I learned to be neurotically punctual. And I also learned to be very impatient, and I'm working on it. Good. From my grandfather, I got my love of the visual arts. From my dad, I got my wild curls. I'm sure they look amazing right now. And also, my love of music. Ouch! From my grandmother, I got my fun but arguably terrible fashion sense. From my mom, I got my organizational skills. If it weren't for her, I probably wouldn't have gone to college because my dad would have never gotten that paperwork in. I wouldn't have gotten that paperwork in. But the few skills that I have, I definitely got from her. My dad could not get into a car without screaming at somebody. Now, I don't mean like in his car, like a normal person. I mean, he would get out and scream at people. And it's kind of actually a wonder that he didn't die by gunshot. So, from him I learned that even your heroes have faults. My mom, when she corrects her students, she does this thing. And what she does is she basically convinces them that a correction is a compliment because it means that they have grown enough that they are ready to work on something new. From my mom, I learned that there's always a nice way to say something if you want to. And that even if somebody hurts you, that doesn't mean they haven't put something really beautiful into the world. The first time that I got sick at college, my dad was having trouble with the fact that he wasn't there to take care of me. So he's put together this video and he sent it to me, and it had all of these pictures of puppies and kittens. And then it had his voice singing Summertime as the audio. And I don't really watch the video much anymore, but I do listen to that audio sometimes. From my dad, I learned how to care for a sick person. And I also learned the gift of unconditional love. And the thing that I got from all the Pressmans is my nose. Now, my dad is dead, if you didn't get that memo. My grandparents both died peacefully in their sleep, in their mid-90s. The synagogue has been remodeled completely. I don't really talk to my mom anymore, and I just try not to ask my brother for anything that I need. But I'm still here.
Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Oh, your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings you're gonna rise up singing. Then you'll spread your wings and take to the sky. But feel that morning there's nothing can harm you, with Daddy and Annie standing by.